Hello, everyone, and welcome to what is now, I think, the third, maybe fourth, I don't know, I think third episode of This Week at Draft. I'm Skip Wilson, CEO of Draft Media Partners. We're doing this podcast, as we mentioned, on each one so far, because we're committed to transparency, and I really wanted to create a space where I can build our company in public. It just makes sense to do that in this type of a format, a vlog, a podcast of sorts. And so that's why we're doing this at Draft. Quite simply, we do advertising. We're an advertising execution company. We have a proprietary tech stack that allows us for the planning and execution of paid media across a variety of verticals. We often work behind the scenes of other media companies, agencies, and fractional CMOs. We're comprised of 7 divisions: Draft Outdoor, the largest network of outdoor advertising; Draft Broadcast, which is our traditional media buying service; Draft Digital, for all things new media; Draft Ad Tech, where we're building the future of advertising; Draft Creative, offering full service creative offerings; Draft Direct, focusing on direct mail; and Draft Promotions, focusing on branded physical products. Last week, I shared our core internal metric, which is the value equation, that value equals result times speed, in parentheses, and then minus errors. Today, I'm going to talk about how we're using something called the 40X framework to achieve our internal goals. That's 4DX. Unlike the value equation, which is our own, the 40X framework, not developed by us. It's just a critically important framework that we use to actually drive results, mostly human resource, how managing like the human time, those things. And so on a personal note, I'm pleased with how the Draft team has been growing, how we've been implementing the processes and frameworks that we've put into place. It's what will truly allow us to have a company that really has no limit on how high we can scale. And so in business, sometimes it can be hard to focus attention and energy to even just know where to focus it is one of the challenges. And that's where the 40X framework comes in. It all starts with what's called the wildly important goal, or WIG, W-I-G. The sort of quintessential example of this, I'm pretty sure this came from the book, but if it didn't, it should have. But the quintessential example of this was when Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, said in that famous speech, we choose to go to the moon in this decade, and do the other things, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. But that we choose to go to the moon in this decade is a very clear, we want to go from here to there by deadline. And that's what the components of a wildly important goal. He's saying that, within the 1960s, so by 1969, which is when we did land on the moon, we want to go from here to the moon. And so, for us at Draft, our wildly important goal, by comparison, is relatively boring, but it has a tremendous impact. We're a fairly young company, so we can have fairly aggressive growth goals. And so for us at Draft, our WIG, our wildly important goal, is 10% quarter-over-quarter revenue growth. So 10% quarter-over-quarter revenue growth. And so we're not going to be able to do that forever and always. I don't want to do that forever and always. I'm against growth for growth's sake. However, we're, again, young enough. We're just coming out of stealth mode, really, this year. And so having spent 3 years or so developing our product and our processes and things, and so we can have a fairly aggressive growth goal. So we want to go from where we are to 10% bigger over the next 3 months. And that's our WIG, 10% quarter-over-quarter revenue growth. So from here to there by a specific time. To achieve that kind of goal, most people, they focus on what's called lag measures. So like if you're trying to lose weight, you'll focus in on like what the scale says, right? But the reality is that's a fairly unactionable thing, right? You can't just make the scale go down or up. For us, the lag measure is, of course, revenue. What is our revenue number? It would be tempting, and indeed, I've worked in organizations where this is the case, where you're just monitoring those lag measures. Sorry for all like the coughing and sneezing and stuff. I didn't realize I had all this going on until I started recording. So sorry about that. But it's very tempting to just monitor like the lag measure. So in this case, it'd be tempting to just monitor revenue. So, what's our revenue by day or week, and then to see if that's on track to hit that 10% growth goal. That is important, and that should be done. You need to know, hey, are we on track to hit it or not? But there's very little insight that can actually be gained. If I see that we actually maybe went backwards in revenue one week, which happens, or the opposite, we have some huge growth, that we're maybe we went up 5 or 6% in one week, which would be great. The reality is that whether it's terrible news or great news, there's really nothing that can be done next week to change the situation. You can't just take that information and be like, well, I hope that changes. And that's why it's called a lag measure, is because the measure actually lags behind the result. When I check this week's revenue, it's really the result of what took place last week, or really in our case, in our business, it's really what took place last month. And so it's not in front of it. So while you have a lag measure, while we have the lag measure of revenue, and that's what we're checking, that's actually not the one to focus on. Instead, we focus on what's called lead measures. These are things that we can see ahead of time that allow us to predict whether we're on track or not, in a way that gives us something we can do next week to do something different. And so each department within Draft has its own lead measures. Our creative department has a very different lead measure than our sales department, those types of things. But when it comes specifically to our wildly important goal, the core lead measure is the number of proposals that go out each week. The number of proposals that go out each week, we found that more than any other metric, that one, the number of media plans, the number of proposals, the number of things we build, is the best indicator of our revenue goal, what our revenue will be the following month. Now, some could argue, and indeed, if like the author of the book, the 40X, is watching, and some could argue that indeed, and we have this debate internally as well, that even tracking the number of proposals we generate is a lag measure, because you can't just generate more proposals. I mean, that wouldn't make sense, right? It wouldn't make sense for us to just start building proposals for companies that don't even know we exist or that we're not in conversations with. So that's why that's not our only lead measure. There are things, though, that we can do to increase, because of the way we're structured, because we are behind the scenes of other companies. We do have a little bit of control over the number of proposals that are created and built. So we can't, that is a little bit more actionable for us than it is maybe for some companies. However, that's not our only lead measure. The other lead measure that we focus on is the number of appointments. The number of appointments we have leads typically to the more proposals we build, and thus the more proposals we build, we know leads to the more revenue that we generate. And so I know that that's not rocket science. Let me let the meeting know that I'm still here. All right, there we go. Sorry. Unlike JFK's goal, what we do is not rocket science. However, it is critically important to track these things. Otherwise, problems aren't known until it's too late. If you're going to have a cash flow or a revenue problem 6 months from now, it's better to know that now, where you can actually maybe do something about it, instead of waiting until morning of, and then all of a sudden you get that bank notification or something like that. So that's the basic framework. You have a wildly important goal. You break that down into both a lag measure, and then lead measure. And sometimes there's multiple lag measures, so sometimes there's multiple lead measures. The important thing, though, is that there's not multiple wildly important goals. Each person must have a very clear, this is your goal, this is the thing you do, and here's how we're going to track it, and those things. And so that brings us to accountability, which is another key component of the 40X model. We do keep a scorecard by department, whether that's how many pieces of creative are made, how many proposals are going out, how many meetings we have. We do keep those things in our CRM. How many core tasks were done, and how are we measuring against our WIG, our wildly important goal. In addition to these objective measures, we also have weekly one-on-one meetings with each team member to make sure that that each member of the team has a clear understanding of what their goal is, and making sure that that they have every tool needed to accomplish it. I mean, that's the thing. It's everyone, I think, is motivated to do a good job, but sometimes you don't realize, oh, so and so needs access to this thing, and because they didn't have it, it's causing them 5 extra hours of work or whatever. And so we just want to make sure that everyone's resourced in those things, and you don't get that kind of information unless you are having regular meetings. And really, that's it. I think more than anything, having a clear goal and a process that works towards that goal, whether it's 40X or not, that's what brings about success. It turns whatever your goal is from hope and dreams into actual reality. And that's what's going on this week at Draft. That's our focus. We go into a new quarter. Even though I know it's technically, I think, the second week of this quarter, but still, as we go into a new quarter, last week didn't count, it's 4th of July week. But that's what we're focused on. As always, love to hear from you. If you have any thoughts, feedback, or suggestions, please email us at info@draftmediapartners.com. That's info@draftmediapartners.com. And to recap, today we discussed the 40X model. Come up with determine what your wildly important goal for yourself or your business is, then break that down into the things you can measure to achieve that goal, both lead and lag measures, and then break that down into how you're going to hold either yourself or others accountable to make sure that those lead measures are moving in the right direction, and then you check the lag measure to make sure that the lead is actually driving the lag. And so we had some major wins last week, and shared some goals for the near future. But anyway, thank you all for tuning in to This Week at Draft, and I will see you next time.